so pumped. I'm over the moon.
Hi guys, welcome to the channel. If you're new here, I'm Jay. I've been involved in Wildland Fire since 2011 and I'm partner to a hotshot. This is meant to be a comfortable space for parents, partners, and companions to appreciate the world their loved ones live in. I want to support those who support our heroes. In these videos, I try to share tips and information for family and friends to understand the world of Wildland Fire and support their firefighter. Throughout my time in Wildland Fire, I've heard the same questions and concerns from loved ones. What draws you to this career? How do you handle the stress of firefighting? How am I, your spouse or partner, mom or dad, supposed to handle the stress of your career? Recently, I chatted with a fellow firefighter and mental health counselor about these topics. Danny Shedden is a licensed professional mental health counselor and owner of Close the Gap Wellness. Her background includes 10 years of mental health counseling before taking on a career in wildland fire for the Bureau of Land Management and the U.S. Forest Service. You can tell in our conversation that she values taking care of people. She commits herself to activities and programs that help educate first responders and their families. More of her bio is below in the description. While editing our interview, it seemed our conversation took on two distinct parts, so I'm going to publish them as separate videos. In this first video, she and I highlight several areas first responders and their families need to have engaging conversation. So a heads up, as Danny and I chat, there are some topics that may be emotionally triggering for some. The foundation of our conversation is the importance of human relationships, not only within wildland fire, but outside as well. Now, I'm not sitting here telling you I am a relationship expert, and there are many types of successful relationships. What we talk about here is how valuable supportive relationships are.
The relationships we have outside of fire are so important. And even as firefighters and our loved ones, we need to remember that we have to invest in those relationships just as much as we prioritize our job. And I get that this line of work is really important to us. Trust me, I get it. But at the same time, our relationships are going to be what's there, hopefully, at the end of this, when we retire. You know, like there's this rat wheel we feel like we're in this profession. And there's so many people that love us outside this rat wheel. And we really need to step out of that rat wheel sometimes and really engage. How are we engaging with those people? What are we sharing about what we do? And who are we outside this profession? We really need to be thinking about that. You know, I always say what we invest in the relationships outside of this profession is so much and more important than some of the stuff that we invest in this job. Because those are the people that are going to be our network, our community when we retire, when we leave this profession.
It's an interesting statement because I did a poll on my Instagram account as to what is it that you really want family and friends to know about what you do. And one of the most interesting responses that I got was, it's not all we are. And I felt like that was super interesting because I think a lot of us feel that way. But we don't really act that way. We don't portray our lives that way, somewhat out of necessity. When it's fire season, sure, you come home to sleep and then you go back to work. So reframing your mind to come home into reframing your mind to the mindset of being at home isn't beneficial because you only have like 6 hours and you're headed back, right? Mm-hmm. So taking that time to transition your brain every single day is too taxing, right?
And that's our responsibility. And I know that was one of the things that we wanted to talk about. That's one of our responsibilities in this career path, to really educate our loved ones on what we do, all the way up to like my mom, giving her more of a slide deck of like, okay, this is what I do and this is normal. So when I make a phone call to her and I only got 2 minutes and something I said triggers something for her, she's not like, wait, what? You're like on the head of a fire? What does that mean? And she's just fearful, and she's watching, the news and seeing all of California burn down. And she's just putting me at the head of that, right? With her understanding. So we have to make sure that we give them not only pre-education, right? Like even just at the dating stage. I always say even before marriage, right? Like it's our responsibility what vocabulary we share, even down to, are we involving them in our career? Are we bringing them maybe to the station once a year, wherever we work, so they get to meet some of the people we work with? Are we taking them out to dinner with everybody that we work with? What does that look like? I always say like involvement is better than no involvement. I see that more in the structure department. They'll have like family barbecues or Thanksgiving at the station. And what are we doing to do that? We have some of these events that we bring on our loved ones. That's a perfect time to be sharing some of that education with them and sharing like, this is what I do, all the way down to when I tell you I'm busy, it's because I'm with these guys and like I'm making sure they're safe.
Part of setting up any support system is establishing an understanding or agreement about the purpose for that relationship. Here's an example from mine. A conversation my partner and I had early on in our relationship was an extremely vulnerable admission on my part that I am a caretaker and giver with very little boundary in place. This characteristic makes it very easy for me to be taken advantage of, and for the people I'm in relationship with to become lazy because I don't allow space for them to give back. It is something I'm aware of and work to improve. I am fortunate enough to have a partner that values the vulnerability and motivation in having this kind of conversation. And together we identified that one of our purposes in being together is that each of us desires growth in ourselves. And we want a partnership that encourages personal evolution and does not wield vulnerability as a weapon. It may sound cliche, but vulnerability takes trust, and trust is at the heart of successfully navigating fire romances.
Absolutely. Expectations. That's one of the things we talked about, is really identifying what those expectations are, and not as a hard and fast rule, because we know as firefighters, things fluctuate, right? But yeah, just something as simple as, like you said, when I say I'm tired, I'm literally tired. I've had a 12-hour day on the line. We're 2 minutes between getting out of the buggy and headed to chow line, and I have 2 minutes to text you and let you know I'm off the line, we're headed to eat, and I'm doing the best that I can to keep you in the loop and keep in touch with you, but I don't have an extended amount of time to have like a long conversation with you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, setting up those, I guess we'll term expectations, and really having that honest conversation, and not just from the firefighter side, but as the partner side, and saying to your firefighter, these are the things that happen during my day, and this is what I need from you. Are you able to provide that for me? Can you check in with me at least once a day if you have cell service, so that I can make sure to let you know if there's anything important going on, or just to hear your voice, or just to send you a little pick me up for the day.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something as basic as that. And I think firefighters, we as firefighters, go into it already knowing what a day will look like. And so we kind of forget that our partners don't know what that day is like. I mean, it's a probably 16 to 18 hour day. You don't have 5 minutes to text me. I hear that from my friends a lot. They don't have 5 minutes to just send me a text. Well, no.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes there is not 5 minutes, or the 5 minutes that I had, I didn't have cell service.
Mm-hmm.
So I can only control what I can control, right?
Yeah. I mean, even down to, I've actually had my engine captain receive a phone call from my kid's school that my son broke his arm, because I didn't have reception, but she did at the point where she was on the fire, right? So even so much as like communicating who your emergency contacts are on your engine besides you, so that message can get transferred. Of course, that looks a little different for me, but even I'm thinking like expectations. Yeah, there's a lot of drawing that out, and it has to come from both ends. Well, and I think that communicating that loneliness and stress, right? And not saying, I don't want you to feel guilty about this, but I want you to feel what I'm feeling, because your emotions, like you're willing to share and are valid, but so are mine, right? In this partnership. And we need an understanding of, I need X, Y, and Z to feel more connected to you, like you said. To just get one text that says good morning is a huge game changer.
It really is.
I remember my husband texting me when he was on fire assignments before I even did fire. And it would be like, good morning with like a sunshine, and I wouldn't hear from him for the whole rest of the day, but at least I knew he was okay. He was moving and that he thought of me.
Of you. Yep. It sets the tone for my entire day, for
Mhm.
sure. And for firefighters to realize that it goes a long way.
So taking the time to chew over these things together builds understanding and trust. This should include exchanging ideas and assumptions about what the fire season looks like, what the probable communication level will be during a fire assignment, how to plan rest days so that it benefits the whole family unit. And it should also include how you would like each other to show up during times of high stress, depression, or even tragedy. Danny has some interesting takeaways for balancing sharing for connection versus reapportioning trauma.
And so when we are talking about maybe not necessarily the worst case scenario, because we'll get into that in a little bit, but just the drain from the season, things that happen in life. Our cohorts have a high rate of divorce, relationship issues. If you have a death in the family, things like that, it all builds up. At what do you suggest firefighters are sharing with their family in order to help maybe bolster that support or that feeling of support that they can get if they're not going to a therapist, if they're not relying on a clinician to help balance that out? Perhaps they can utilize their friends and family a little bit more. But what are you suggesting, that what kind of, I guess, environment, or what kind of questions, or what kind of sharing do you suggest for folks?
So one of the things that I would necessarily say is whatever you feel like isn't going to cause trauma on the other person, right? And I talked about this when we've talked, Jay, about secondary trauma and how we get secondary trauma. And that's just exposing someone to the stuff that we take. That usually, right, trauma is an emotional response to an unexpected traumatic event, a terrible event, like one of those things that I can think of in our line of work is line of duty. That can also be serious injuries, us witnessing pretty serious injuries, burns, things like that. So or even a community, losing a community. So whatever you feel comfortable with sharing, that isn't that too much where you feel like it may traumatize another individual. My example of that even is, I was sitting in a fire refresher, and right, we in Wildland Fire, one of the things that we do to connect with each other is storytelling, and I love it, right? We're really good storytellers. And during that fire refresher, an individual at the front that was teaching was a medic on scene, and had heard or had witnessed a pretty traumatic event that many of us have read about in Wildland Fire. And he went into detail of what was happening, what that looked like. I mean, down to what the bodies looked like, right? If you can only imagine how traumatizing that was for everyone in the room that may not have even been there, but now they have a picture. They just got a slide of what that looked like what the smell, the everything, what it all looked like. And that was just so unnecessary. And it was one of the things that I brought up to them after, like that actually causes trauma to other people. It actually caused an emotional response for almost everyone in the room, to the point of everyone either being uncomfortable, really sad, some people becoming very angry that he was sharing that. So I always like to say, if you wouldn't be willing to share that and not want an emotional response from like a family member or cause harm in that way, that's a perfect example, right? Like if you come and you talk about what you witnessed when some tragedy fire happened, and maybe to a public, member, and it was pretty scarring for you. That's when I always say, man, go to a counselor and talk that out, because they're trained on kind of how to take that in and how to compartmentalize that and keep their own safety within, so that they don't become traumatized by your event that you witnessed. Now, if you're telling someone that doesn't have that training or that experience, like a family member, that's causing fear, that's causing sadness, everything, right? If someone came home and told me about a tragedy they've seen, even my husband, a lot of the times I'm like, okay, I don't want you in a helicopter anymore. And you could see where that fear response could come from, like now it's personal, right? Now it's personal. I don't want you in a helicopter. And that's what I'm putting my mind to. Just because maybe you witnessed something with a helicopter, now I don't want you in a helicopter, And now if you're in a helicopter and you talk about it in a year, I'm angry, right? So
Right.
I always say, protect those people we love. Share what you're willing to share. That's not going to cause a trauma response on them, a big emotional response, but also enough to connect with that person, right? They want to know what you do, and that's totally normal. But you don't have to traumatize them with some of the experiences that you may have witnessed or seen.
So there seems to be a pendulum that you can have oversharing on one
Yes.
end, where then you are alienating loved ones. But if you swing to the far end on the other side, where your family is asking you to share with them, and you're completely closed off because you feel like they don't understand, or they couldn't possibly understand what you were experiencing, or perhaps if they're just you feel like they're asking out of courtesy, they're not actually interested. There's this huge array of responses. And I suggest, trial and error, being able to work with your loved ones on what balance, where the balance is.
Yes.
Because both sides can alienate and create walls in your relationship.
Yeah. And it also depends on like what they do for a living too, right? So I always say, like, my husband and I both do something around fire. So we probably share a little bit more on that pendulum of more of the overshare closer. We both feel like we understand. But I've seen that even
You're
like
both familiar with the environment.
we have the
You
same
have a
language.
Exactly.
We have the same language. We have the same environment. We can actually talk about, helicopters and both be like, oh yeah, I know what she's talking about, or I know what he's talking about. And we want to hear that too, right? Like we want to hear each other's stories. Now, if I was talking to even, let's say my significant other was a nurse, I would probably share some because of what they experience as a nurse too. But that doesn't mean that I would completely share everything as well. There's a, like you said, it's kind of a trial and error. It's like, how much can they handle without exposing them too much and causing secondary trauma? But also, you don't want to not share it all and just say, oh, it's just part of the job, I leave it at the door, because then they definitely feel alienated. And, why are you in a relationship, quite frankly, at that point, if you're not willing to share anything you do? So.
Now, though Danny expresses the added understanding that comes from work in fire and being involved with a fire partner, she advocates strongly for professional counseling in instances of trauma or a needed skill set. I asked her to shed some light on why it seems the fire culture is comfortable encouraging help for others, but is reluctant to accept it for ourselves.
In my experience, I have come across several of my fellow firefighters that understand the value of mental health, but not necessarily the value of getting help for that. Can you speak to that a little?
Yeah, I feel like I speak to this a lot on the ground because we talk a lot about, we're all about getting mental health. Like if you need it, man, like we're going to help you get there. Okay, but why don't you actually need it too? You know, and why doesn't everyone need it? Why aren't we all taking advantage of it? So I always say with that, you know, it's easy to tell other people that you're there for them and that you may need this resource, and maybe even giving someone a phone number for employee assistance program and kind of like washing our hands, or saying, hey, I know of a clinician, Close the Gap Wellness in Boise, here you go. And then just saying, I'm done here. The hard part is actually really looking within of, when will I need this service? When do I start doing some preventative work, so that I, you know, don't have a bad day, if you will, or I already have a resource in place when I do have a bad day. So I actually was talking to a couple groups of firefighters recently, and one of the things I said is, we go and we move all over the country, right? We move for jobs, we move all over. It's kind of like the military. Well, when we get to these places, what do we usually do? We usually find a dentist, hopefully. We usually find a general practitioner, right? Someone that we could go to the doctor, or maybe an urgent care in our area. Why aren't we finding a mental health professional? And I always say, you know, why not establish care with someone in case you do need that? So that you already have a name and number, you already have rapport built, and then if you need it, you can have access to it.
I think through the agency, at least, there are several, with the benefit plans through the agency, there are several sessions with a mental health therapist that are covered every year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so every land agency that I know of right now are all on an Aspire contract. So that's the contractor's name is Aspire, ESPYR. So we all currently have access to 6 free counseling, and it resets every year. So you actually could go back to your therapist every year for 6 free, no matter what. No copays, nothing like that. And there's no way to really track even back. It's very anonymous. There's no way for the agency to say, oh, you know, Danny Shedden, she's been going to counseling every year using those 6 free. There's no way to track that. The agency has no connection.
So it's at this point in our conversation that we took a deep dive into mental health, trauma, imposter syndrome, and how families need to prepare for the worst case situation. I'll publish part 2 of this talk soon. In the meantime, I hope this initial conversation brought value to how you view your connection, role, or understanding of the emergency responder in your life.
Ending with a voiceover, guys. Towards the end here, my recording equipment stopped. And so I just want to say, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and share it with others. Comment below topics you'd like to see content about, and be sure to hit the bell icon so you don't miss part 2 of my discussion with Danny. See you in the next one.